Selamat siang Bapak Ibu, para value partner kita dari Eastspring Investment Indonesia. Selamat siang, apa kabar? Semoga semuanya sehat-sehat selalu ya, walaupun kita dalam bertemunya harus virtual lagi berhubung masih PPKM ya, dan PPKM-nya masih agak panjang lah ya sampai 9 Agustus. Untuk awal-awal saya mengucapkan banyak terima kasih sudah join meluangkan waktu Bapak Ibu pada siang hari ini untuk mendengarkan sedikit apa yang seru-seruan kan ya, baru aja terjadi sama di China itu sendiri. Ya sebenarnya sebelum saya perkenalkan ke pembicara-pembicara kita, ya kita melihatnya ini sebagai sesuatu yang positif kalau Bapak Ibu perhatikan ya. China sendiri dalam fase ingin melakukan yang namanya ESG. Kalau Bapak Ibu pernah dengar ESG, Environmental, Social, and Governance, ya itu salah satu hal yang positif sebenarnya, tapi cara melakukannya mungkin itu yang agak menjadi pertanyaan untuk market. Seperti contohnya, kalau nggak salah ada sekolahan juga ya, after school tutorial lah kita sebutnya, itu juga diregulasi sama pemerintah. Sebenarnya bagus, itu tujuannya kenapa? Biar katanya anak-anak nggak terlalu stres gitu ya. Bayangin kayak anak saya aja sekarang habis sekolah masih ada les coding Bapak Ibu, ya ini katanya bagus gitu. Jadi anak nggak terlalu stres, yang ekonominya kurang beruntung juga nggak rebut-rebutan saing-saingan, karena after school lesson itu juga nggak murah Bapak Ibu ya. Jadi mereka ingin apa namanya ya, meregulasi agar semua itu bisa kebagian, semua itu lebih indah lah intinya untuk generasi selanjutnya. Nah, sebelum kita mulai, saya ingin memperkenalkan pembicara kita ya. Kebetulan dua-duanya ini nanti mungkin akan berbicara setengah bahasa Inggris, setengah bahasa Indonesia. Tapi kalau ada yang mau tanya, nggak apa-apa, pakai bahasa Indonesia aja. Bapak Ibu bisa ketik di kolom Q&A di bagian bawah ya. Feel free untuk bertanya, nanti saya sampaikan ke pembicara-pembicara kita. Oke, untuk pertama saya ingin perkenalkan juga Bapak Eu-Roy. Beliau itu selaku Equity Portfolio Manager dari Eastspring Al'Wara. So how are you, Eu-Roy? Everything's good over there in Malaysia?
Hi, Abraham. Thanks for having me.
All good?
All good here.
Okay, before we start, and in another one, I would like to introduce our own Kong Qian. So he's the head of equity from Eastspring Investment Indonesia. Hi, Kong Qian. How are you today?
Hi, Ara. Good.
Good. Okay.
Glad to be on the call.
Okay. Without further ado, let's start ahead. Yeah. So I would like to point to our first speakers, which is Eu-Roy. Okay, Eu-Roy. We know what happened with the China recently, and it's quite worrying for some of our investors. But also, by the end of the day, there are also positive news as well. So probably, can you elaborate more on what happened in the China and what happened with one of our fund, Greater China, and how do you see the aftermath effect after this? Go ahead, Eu-Roy. Thank you.
Okay, Abraham, maybe I've prepared some slides for today.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I will share my screen here. Are you seeing the screen?
Yeah, looking, still starting the screen. Okay, looking good.
All right. So the reason, well, thank you for having me today. The main message today as to why we are here is probably just to address a bit more on the recent regulatory concerns in China. I'm not sure how we're going to do this, Abraham. Do you want me to take us through the whole deck, or we do bit by bit?
Yeah, let's do bit by bit. Yeah, so let's take it step by step.
Okay.
Because I understand what the government China is actually doing good, right? But it's just some of the investors are quite worrying with what the action is. Okay, go ahead, Eu-Roy.
All right, so just a quick summary. You see here the red line, obviously the chart that has fallen the most. That is the China market performance year to date. Very obvious, it has underperformed other markets, equity markets. The key reason is because obviously the internet stocks in China has taken a very huge beating this year. And internet stocks typically are quite large percentage of the China universe. So that's where we are today. The key reason why these internet stocks, when we talk about these internet stocks that have dropped so much this year, is because of regulatory risk, right, as we know it. So maybe a bit of background for everyone. The issue with regulation actually kind of started in November last year. If you recall, it started with Alibaba when Ant Financial was going to its mega IPO. And Jack Ma, which is the founder of Alibaba, made some comments that were not taken positively by the government. And subsequently, what they did, it started the ball rolling on a regulatory crackdown on not just Alibaba, but the sector as a whole. So typically how the Chinese government does things is they have 3 steps, right? They start with a draft, an opinion. They'll publish an opinion. And so they'll give it some time after that opinion. And then subsequently, they will have a draft. And when the draft is out, a couple months down the road, they will have the final ruling or regulation or new law in place. So today, what that has already happened for what we call anti-competitive behavior and predatory pricing. So you see in this chart here, pretty much Alibaba has been dished out a record $2.8 billion US fine, and the State Administration of Market Regulation in China has also come up with a law clearly stating what is anti-competitive behavior and the fines that you will receive if you violate these laws. So that's where we are today. And obviously a lot of sectors, like you mentioned earlier, Abraham, education was one of the one in the crosshairs as well. But our key message here today is that we think education is a bit more unique. Not necessarily the same results will happen to a lot of the other sectors. Like here, in the internet commerce sector, like Alibaba is involved in, the fine was actually quite not that big and as to disrupt its operations, unlike what we saw in the education sector, which we can talk a bit more about later as well.
Okay, thanks, Eu-Roy. I think you might want to go ahead with so what do we expect with addressing these issues? Yeah.
All right. So maybe I'll just very quickly summarize, right? Because there are a couple of areas where the government is kind of targeting. So the first one we shared here, the anti-competitive segment, that is kind of an older one that is kind of drawing to an end. But there are more areas where the government is kind of targeting and cracking down at this moment. So here, social welfare, that's a relatively new one, and that kind of impacts a lot of the ride-sharing platforms, as we saw recently with Meituan and also Didi. Basically, companies or giants in China that employ a lot of social workers at a very minimum wage. Those are some of the sectors that have come under pressure recently. The other one is also on user data. So most internet companies in this segment is actually involved because most internet companies are actually mining a lot of user data. But the big one I would say is Didi, right? Because Didi went ahead with the US IPO despite the regulators saying to postpone it because of some of the user security issues. So that kind of caused a lot of panic in the market, because subsequently Didi was removed from the App Store post IPO. So it kind of left a bad feeling in a lot of investors, hence also affecting sentiment in the sector. Lastly, I would say the other sector obviously is education, and this one's a bit unique, right? Because we think that the government has made it clear now, or as most people would now be aware, that they are classifying the education sector as a not-for-profit sector. So when I say not-for-profit, it basically means that the companies are allowed to make a profit. It's just that when they say it's not-for-profit, you are not allowed to make excessive profit. To read between the lines, basically here, a lot of these education companies today, what they will have to do is the government is the one that will be setting the prices, not them. Hence not-for-profit destination. And also the government has announced that these companies are not allowed to raise foreign capital or pretty much go in foreign IPO route. So if you ask me, the outcome actually on the education sector has been much harsher than most people have expected, and hence why the market was falling so sharply when the final this is actually a draft document, so we don't have the final rule out yet. But typically in China, when the draft document comes out, it's as close as the final as you get. So when the draft document for the education sector came out, pretty much the internet sector suffered heavily. Not just education, people were starting to speculate what other sectors would get hit. So like healthcare, property, all those were sold down massively when the draft regulation for the education sector came out. And obviously, the last part here is the VIE structure. So this is a bit long-winded and a bit more complicated, and I don't want to spend too much time on the VIE structure, but it matters to know that a lot of Chinese internet companies, because of the Chinese law, are not allowed to list its actual entities, and hence they list through a variable. They actually don't list through a variable, but they set up a variable interest entity and use this route as a listing route. So like your major names in China, like Ali, Tencent, JD, all of them are actually listed under this VIE structure. So it's not a structure that is new or exciting that the regulator is clamping down. Rather, we think that this structure is actually something that the government wants to regulate. They have actually published some laws in regards to listing through via the VIE structure. Pretty much, if you're collecting more than 1 million user data in China, you have to get government approval to get a listing, which also means that it's not illegal, right? The VIE structure, because the government wants to regulate it. So it's not illegal. And a lot of foreign investors are now running away because to them, the crackdown on the education sector that does not allow it to list as VIE, they kind of view it as same as other sectors. But our view is strictly that we do not think this is the case from where the Chinese government is trying to regulate. So pretty much that's the summary on the regulation. Abraham, maybe I'll let you go on from here before we...
Sure, you're right. Thanks. So basically, yeah. So though I would say those regulations were quite positive to the market. Yeah, anti-monopoly. They want everybody to have a fair play, right? And in terms of education, you cannot regulate tiger moms. They are there all the times. They want the kids to do after-school lessons. But anyway, it's all good. Okay, the next question will be. We've seen the COVID number in China on the rise as well with the Delta variant. Is there any worry about the market situation after this? And is the technology sector, because of this COVID, will be on the rise after this? Can you take us through to that situation, Eu-Roy? How do you see it?
Okay, so I think quite simply, we do not think the rise in recent COVID cases because of the Delta variant is going to cause much of an impact. I think that view for us is not just China, right? It's pretty much shared across Asia Pacific. We saw that in India where there were rising cases of COVID, and actually the market actually recovered and rebounded even to an even higher level after that. So we think in this case, China is no different, especially since the government is quite adept at handling the COVID cases. So any sell-off, we think, related to COVID is pretty much a buying opportunity for us. But in fact, we haven't seen much impact from COVID. On technology, I would say it has been a sector that foreign investors or global investors or even domestic investors that look at China has favored because when we say technology, obviously we're talking about hardware and semiconductors sector. That's a sector that the government is very keen to promote. They are trying to reduce their reliance on foreign imports of technology, and hence a lot of money is being pumped by the government itself into those sectors, which we think should be one of the sectors that will do well in the long term.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Eu-Roy. So, okay, we're gonna stop with Eu-Roy first at this point. So, Bapak Ibu, kalau ada pertanyaan, please go ahead. Di bawah ada Q&A, tinggal isi aja. Nanti saya tinggal tanyain pertanyaannya. Mau pakai bahasa Indonesia juga nggak apa-apa, bahasa Melayu nggak apa-apa juga. Nanti Eu-Roy juga dengan Melayu. Okay, Eu-Roy, let's stop here for a sec. I'm gonna pass to Kong Qian. You can have a drink. Okay. Bapak Kong Qian, so with all the situation that's going on with China, what do you think the effect to Indonesian market? Is it going to be good? Is that big? And because of this PPKM, there's a much more restriction. What do you think of the Indonesian market until at least the end of this year?
Yeah, thank you, Ara. I'll answer in English, mix in a bit of bahasa ya.
Sure, it's fine.
Okay,
That's fine.
Pertama kali, what's happening in China? Mungkin kalau lihat impactnya di Indonesia, yeah, we would think about it across maybe three different aspects. Obviously, number one, flows kan. Kalau sell off di China, will that money come here? I think simple answer is it's not as easy as that. Yeah, many investors don't just shift money from North Asia to especially Indonesia. Lagipun this market is smaller, and if you're talking about a tech sell-off in North Asia, Indonesia has a few tech companies now, internet companies, but it's not to the same track record or investors being comfortable with them. So portfolio flows, I don't think there will be significant. Though of course you may argue that if North Asian markets are not performing, then fund managers need to look elsewhere, and hopefully Indonesia is one destination, yeah, that is attractive. And could it be attractive? The market has underperformed year to date. Large caps have underperformed, and then on the other side, there are new internet-based businesses that have become a bit more investable, including the listing of Bukalapak on Friday this week. Yeah, so in terms of flows, not so direct, but worth pointing out that it's not just portfolio flows, capital market flows, but the venture capital, private equity flows have definitely been coming to Indonesia, right? And it also comes from the same names. Alibaba, Tencent have funded vehicles in Indonesia, right? And it's not new; it's been happening for years. With the crackdown in China, especially, you could imagine that some of the excess capital may not be able to be deployed as quickly in China because regulation slows it down. That certainly is a possibility. And these venture investors, these tech investors, may be looking more broadly. Yeah, and Indonesia is a bit more of a frontier market when it comes to such investments. Perhaps on that front, right? Venture and technology investors will start to look more towards this region. Certainly, when looking at the Bukalapak IPO, we get a sense that Southeast Asian-based investors, not just mutual funds, portfolio investors like ourselves, right, but very strategic investors in this region are paying attention. And obviously, Indonesia is a large economy within Southeast Asia. It makes sense for these investors to pay attention. Yeah. So from flows, to summarize, capital market flows not so much, but certainly when strategic flows, strategic allocation, that is something that's happening structurally anyways. Yeah. Then number two will be the Bukalapak IPO, along with the sentiment for the internet businesses in Indonesia, which really only became investable in the last 12 months. We're at very different stages compared to China. So based on just the last 1 or 2 weeks, does not seem like the impact in North Asia is worrying investors here. Certainly the investor base here is smaller. And a key test of that will be the Bukalapak IPO this Friday. Yeah. So sentiment-wise, I think sentiment is still pretty positive because we're at a very early stage in the journey for Indonesian internet companies. And finally, number three will be regulation, right? In China, regulation is what sparked all of this. But I think that that level of regulation will not come to Indonesia anytime soon. As regulators, well, you may not have a regulator for some aspects of these businesses, especially e-commerce. There are protections like Data Protection Act, which all the companies need to abide by. But certainly it's not coming through from a regulator that would stop these businesses from innovating, right? Perhaps slightly different will be the digital banks, who remain to be regulated by BI and OJK. So perhaps from a regulatory point of view, seeing what's happening in China, that the regulators here may just be more prudent and conservative. Yeah, but it's a different environment completely, and the businesses here, the banks here, are introducing basic services as they start to roll out their apps, and it is certainly not as integrated as the ecosystems in China. Yeah.
Okay.
So just specifically to answer the question, we broke it down in terms of flows, the sentiment, and regulation. Overall, I think the short answer is not much impact that we can foresee in the near term.
Oke, dan perubahan dari China sendiri, impact-nya nggak banyak ke Indonesia ya.
Yeah.
And then kita akan melihat ada game changer juga ya di Indonesia dengan ada Bukalapak mau IPO. Ini Bapak Ibu yang klien distribusi kita kemarin pada nanya, Fund-nya Kong Qian nanti ada berapa persen? Bentar ya Bapak Ibu, kita nggak bisa kasih tahu. Tunggu aja nanti hari hanya bakal dikasih tahu sama teman-teman Eastspring Bapak Ibu ya.
Iya, sebenarnya kita harus nunggu fun fact sheet di akhir bulan Agustus.
Ya.
Dan kalau masuk di top 10 kelihatan.
Betul, betul sekali.
But the actual allocation, yeah, we cannot say lah.
Betul.
But for sure, this is the first IPO of such a business, and surprisingly, it surprised the company too. They were planning for less than $1.5 billion in the end. Demandnya besar, and they're raising $1.5 billion.
Wow.
So impact to sentiment for the rest of the year, memang it sets the tone, yeah, for the rest of internet businesses looking to IPO, how the reception is from investors. Now, you also asked about the market to the end of the year. Unfortunately, the JCI, or if you look at LQ45, is driven by quite different dynamic. Yeah, so whilst the internet space and this IPO of Bukalapak may in itself be attracting a lot of attention, but it's not the same for the broad market. The broad market, we would describe it as there's a structural shift as these new opportunities come up. Investors also rebalancing their portfolios to assess, the new economy opportunities versus the common blue chip large caps that we're familiar with, the large banks, Astra, Telkom. We continue to be optimistic and positive about their earnings and the valuation. In fact, valuations have come down. It looks cheap. And so in the portfolios, we are invested across both sides. The internet opportunities as something very new in the market, and where the companies are delivering earnings and valuations are cheap. We think that they continue to deserve a place in the portfolios.
Oke, thanks Kong Qian. Jadi kalau saya boleh summary dikit Bapak Ibu, jadi kita melihatnya memang ke depannya masih banyak positif, seperti contoh IPO-nya Bukalapak, tapi tentunya juga ada perubahan, seperti Pak Kong Qian bilang, LQ45 mungkin tidak akan menjadi seperti yang dulu lagi. Kalau fund kita mau naik, tentu kita harus lebih inovatif, makanya mungkin Bapak Ibu lihat ya, kita juga invest di digital banking, seperti yang Pak Kong Qian tadi ceritain, karena dengan PPKM ini, kita melihat digital itu akan sustainable ke depannya juga, ya. Belum lagi Telkom juga sama, Bapak Ibu, apalagi yang pada pakai pulsa, kita sendiri aja sekarang ketemu acara Zoom aja juga pakai telecommunication seperti ini. Belum lagi teman-teman kita yang menjadi artis Instagram, artis YouTube, Bapak Ibu, itu adalah source of income yang baru juga. Ya, jadi itu masih luar biasa, belum lagi sarana infrastrukturnya. Oke, thank you Kong Qian. So I'll gonna get back to you, Roy. Okay, Roy, we received a question. Can you share us some lights regarding your portfolio in Greater China? How would you see the portfolio in Eastspring Greater China in the future? If you can share something on today. You're on mute, Roy.
All right. Okay. Sorry about that.
No
I also see two questions that kind of relate to what you're asking here.
Yeah.
So I will try and go ahead and take all these questions at one go, kind of giving a bit longer term outlook and where our portfolio will be, right? Okay, so I'll just share my screen back to earlier. So to answer the question whether we think China is a time to buy right now, especially the internet names that has fallen so much, and whether these are some of the names that we want to hold for the long term, right? So in this chart, I kind of want to draw out our thought process here. Obviously the earnings estimates of the internet companies in China, and the blue line MSCI China, which is the index level. You can see the index level has started to fall, obviously recently because of the regulatory risk. And subsequently as well, we see a lot of earnings estimates by the street being downgraded. So people are expecting companies like Tencent, Alibaba, whatnot, to report earnings that will still grow, but grow at a slower pace. And in fact, Alibaba just reported last night, and that was in fact the case, right? They reported a kind of a slower revenue growth number, but however, the net profit was actually better than expected. So we think that is probably a trend that would happen across a lot of the internet companies this year, especially when the crackdown pressure is so huge on them. So what a lot of these companies are doing is they have said that this year they will tidy up a lot of their users, limit for Tencent, for example, limit use spending time on gaming, on their games. So obviously revenue growth will be slower, but at the same time, a lot of these companies will be able to grow their profit because a lot of investments and spending on marketing. For instance, the government has said that you cannot sell your goods below cost. That is a form of predatory pricing. And that practice was quite common on a lot of companies like PDD and Meituan, where they were battling it out in the group purchase segment. They were selling a lot of items below cost. That is now illegal. So a lot of these companies probably will see much better levels of earnings, but slower growth moving forward. So we think the market would need some time to adjust. Here you can see valuations, right? So we had a kind of a sell-off in the sector. But if you look at historically versus the Chinese internet valuation multiples, it is clear that it's not yet at a bottom level. I would say the most recent bottom these internet companies hit was in 2018, right? Remember, there was a trade war happening, and monetary policy was tightening very quickly in China at the start of the year. So markets didn't do very well. And you can see here, at that time in 2018, the multiples kind of range about 18 to 20 times across the sector. We're not there yet, but we're kind of close. So if you see share prices falling about 10% or 15% more, then we'll probably approach those levels where we would say that, internet sector is probably something that you want to be overweight in. But unfortunately, we're not yet at that kind of level, right? But there is a very key point that I want to make when talking about regulatory pressure and in China, right? So amidst all the headline news, the market dropping so much, I think one thing people did not really pay a lot of attention in the month of July was that we saw the Chinese central bank actually announcing a reserve requirement ratio cut by 50 basis points. So that is after they have tightened monetary policy since the start of the year. So they have been tightening monetary policy basically because economic growth has been very strong. But the recent month in July, they have finally cut the reserve requirement ratio. To us, that kind of signals the end of monetary policy tightening. We don't think they will start loosening, but at least there will be no more tightening moving forward. So that is actually a big positive for us moving forward. And we think markets actually could actually perform better here on, right? So one area we like because of this monetary policy being more favorable for equities is especially in the A-share market, which is the domestic China market. So that's an area in the portfolio where we are actually overweight right now. And we also think in the longer term, that's something where it will actually tend to perform quite well because of the foreign investor flows continuing to go into the A-share market. So I think that kind of answers the question in terms of where we're positioning. So we're kind of bullish the A-share market at this point in time.
Okay, thanks, Roy. That's quite very detailed. So basically, yeah, with all the challenges is the regulations currently, right? But we believe we're going to go through there, and with the Chinese government is also cutting the RRR. So basically, we're expecting for the economic to grow again. Yeah, Roy. Yeah. So
Abraham, maybe one last thing which I think is important to note as well, and when we talk about regulation. So previously, I think in July, there was a regulatory announcements across various government bodies, right? So the Cyberspace Security Commission, the CSRC, which is the China Reform Commission, and then you have the Ministry of Technology, and then we also had a lot of local governments announcing policies. So there were noises across the landscape, which rightfully so made investors very fearful of policy risk in the month of July. But I would say there has been, again, some updates in this regard that has not been very well noticed across markets, which is there was an announcement in China, I think a week ago, where the central government, obviously the highest policy-making decision body, has actually said that all policy announcements moving forward should come out of the CSRC. So no longer we will see a lot of noise across various channels in China, but it should be directed out of CSRC. One example of this obviously is yesterday when we saw the article coming out from news publishing media on Tencent, calling gaming in China, which is mobile gaming, spiritual opium, right? They use a very harsh word. And understandably, when the market opened, once that article came out, Tencent's share price dived very quickly, was down 11% at one point yesterday. But what we saw was the article was actually retracted very quickly. And subsequently, it came out again with a much milder tone. I think that is a sign, a very strong sign that the central government is quite aware now that the actions they are doing is quite detrimental to the longer term growth of the sector. And that is not something they want. But what they want is actually for the sector to develop more healthily, right? Not what we're seeing where, share prices go 20-30% nosedive one day because of some announcement, and then foreign investors actually take their money and leave. So that's not something they want. And to us, when they announced that, is actually a big positive moving forward, because we think as the regulators realize the damage that they caused, things will be a bit more muted moving forward.
Okay, thanks, Roy. That's quite resourceful. So, okay, let me translate it to summary in bahasa for you guys ya, Mbak. Jadi pada dasarnya memang regulasi dari pemerintah China ini ada banyak tantangannya Bapak Ibu, tapi memang jangan khawatir, ini regulasi ini dibuat agar ya saham-saham investasinya itu naiknya secara sehat juga. Seperti tadi yang Pak Eu-Roy bilang ya, bahwa kayak anti monopoli, pokoknya semuanya kita ya di sini akan dilindungi juga sama pemerintah. Investor dilindungi, jadi nggak mau harga sahamnya tiba-tiba naik karena ada satu investor besar beli terus tiba-tiba akan turun juga. Nah, dan good thing-nya sekarang yang akan ngasih pengumumannya itu akan diregulasi dari satu departemen saja ya. Mobile gaming tadi juga Bapak Ibu juga dengar dari Eu-Roy ya, akan ada regulasinya juga. Jadi ya sebenarnya is very good ya, karena kalau kita lihat juga ya sekarang dengan PPKM di rumah, anak-anak kita sendiri aja kan, saya nggak tahu, saya dengar anak saya sih main Fortnite mulu gitu ya. Jadi itu kan sesuatu yang ya kalau terterusan itu dibilang katanya sebagai opium, nggak bagus juga ya, which is good gitu. Jadi kita melihat China itu pemerintahnya meregulasinya itu untuk investor itu secara baik sekali Bapak Ibu. Oke, nah saya akan bacain pertanyaannya, Bapak Ibu jangan lupa bisa langsung aja bertanya di bawah ini di Q&A, langsung diketik aja, nanti saya akan tanyain pertanyaannya ke para narasumber kita pada hari ini. Dan kalau nggak salah 5 pertanyaan pertama nanti akan dapat hadiah ya dari tim marketing kita, nanti akan dikontak juga. Oke, jadi saya akan bacain pertanyaan pertama. How do you think about the China regulations? As it do you count as a buying opportunity? Well, I'm putting my money on Euro, so I'm gonna say yes, it's a buying opportunity ya. Okay, let's skip that one ya. Ya, buying opportunity, I will say ya, kalau namanya investor melihat ada opportunity, apalagi sekarang kan Bapak Ibu investasi di reksadana ya, manage fund. Bapak Ibu lihat kita ada fund manager yang manage, sih seharusnya nggak usah khawatir. Seperti ini aja juga Bapak Ibu lihat sendiri, sudah ada Eu-Roy dan Kong Qian yang akan mereallocate strategi dari portfolionya. Kedua pertanyaannya dari Pak Steven, Chinese tech stock drop for over 30%. Ya, tadi mungkin sudah jelas ya arahannya dari Eu-Roy. Eu-Roy lebih suka ke semiconductors ya, Eu-Roy. You see that a lot of scarce on the global on the chips. So you'll be looking at that opportunity as well, yeah. And how do you think about the consumer goods, Roy? Would they be good as well?
China? It's probably not too good for consumer staples this year because raw material prices have increased by a lot. So a lot of these staple companies in China, they are unable to hike prices, or rather they cannot hike too much because obviously the government will come at them if they hike prices by too aggressively as well. So, but on the other hand, raw material prices, like for example, palm oil prices, sugar prices, coffee prices have all gone up. And these are impacting margins for a lot of the staple companies in China. So that's a sector that we are not too favorable at the moment.
Oke, thanks Eu-Roy. Ya, ini kayaknya menjawab pertanyaannya juga ya untuk Pak Steven, untuk sektor yang favorable. Oke, selanjutnya US Treasury 10-year yield is it up and over? I think I'm gonna pass this to Kong Qian ya. Kong Qian, how do you see? Mungkin lebih mau bertanya mengenai apakah taper akan terjadi ya mungkin ya dengan mereka ekonomi sudah membaik ya, Pak Kong Qian.
Yeah, also not my area of expertise, but I'll try to answer this based on my knowledge. We have colleagues in Singapore. Di Singapore ada tim yang memanage portfolio fixed income yang cukup besar, ya, dan sudah tentu view ini this reflect view-nya dari tim di Singapore. Terakhir update. Memang dari awal tahun 10-year yield looked like it was overshooting ya, dengan ekspektasi growth was getting out of hand, inflation getting out of hand ya. Kemudian sejak itu I think the peak was berapa 1,8 ya sekitar. It has come down, malah it has come down to below 1.2%. And there are some technicalities involved, but since the early part of the year, juga kelihatan beberapa faktor di mana growth and then of course implication on inflation has again shifted. Ya, kalau di awal tahun the debate about transitory inflation or is it permanent inflation, and thinking it's permanent inflation, jadinya interest rate harus naik dan yieldnya continue to rise. Ever since then, I think it's shifted a bit more towards the middle. Whether or not inflation is going to be permanently higher. Kemudian, what we're seeing is that growth in some areas, in some pockets, may be weaker than expected, including growth in the US. So that brings, I think that explains what has happened in maybe on the year-to-date basis, the rise in the yields, and then now we're back at below 1.2. Is the uptrend over? The view is that it will be a bit more range bound, yeah. Bisa juga naik lagi, right? Because the Fed will be very careful in talking about a taper, yeah. And this only taper. Kemudian, interest rate hikes are much further down the road, but it does come back to a situation where the US economy has come out of the COVID shock from last year, and over time, gradually, the monetary stimulus needs to be removed. That much is udah diakui lah, right? So that will come. The taper and the monetary stimulus will need to be reduced. Yeah. And if we read from there, then that should lead to higher yields, but not shooting past the 1.8 that we saw earlier in the year. Yeah, so I think the markets are a bit more balanced right now, but the yield will be a bit more range bound.
Oke, thanks Kong Qian. Jadi kalau kita lihat mungkin market US juga sudah ada perbaikan ya, cuman kita masih melihat juga karena kan Delta varian juga agak mulai naik ya Bapak Ibu. Stimulus itu juga masih banyak, bantuan dari pemerintah juga masih berjalan terus. So let's see what's going on juga Bapak Ibu. Karena kalau kita sebut nama inflasi ya kita harus lihat lagi ini real kenaikan inflasi atau karena dikasih stimulus nih sama pemerintah. Kayak contohnya nih saya pernah iseng nanya, sepupu saya di Amerika bisa tiba-tiba dapat cek 1.400 US dollar Bapak Ibu tanpa ngapa-ngapain ya. Dan namanya dapat cek karena ini adalah retail ya. Kan ada yang satu ditabung, ada yang satu ke Kmart. Nah, jadi semuanya nggak sama. Jadi kita akan lihat lebih closely lagi tentunya Bapak Ibu. Oke, thank you. And the last question I'm gonna address this to you Roy from Hubert. So, how do you see China's regulatory support to China's capital market in terms of how the cap market plays as a function in economy and openness towards the international investor? So it's probably addressing about how to get the more international investor coming in to China.
All right. I think the recent foreign investors were very worried, as mentioned earlier, because of doubts over the VIE structure in China, because of what had happened to the education sector. So I think the clearest point is that post what has happened, actually what we saw is several government officials in China, they have come out to say that, first of all, they still support the VIE structure. And second of all, there is no rule that they are banning companies in China going for overseas listing. In fact, that's something they support, but they do require them to get approval from the Cyberspace Security Administration, especially if they have more than 1 million user data on hand, which is pretty much every company in China that is going to listing, they will have more than 1 million user data accumulated. So they've made it clear that they still welcome foreign capital. They're still allowing Chinese company to go listing. And then also subsequently, the officials have made a comment that capital market reform is still something that China takes very seriously, and they will continue to actually allow this. And one biggest example, if you ask me, recently about welcoming foreign capital was China actually allowed Goldman Sachs to take full 100% stake in their own asset management in China. So if they were not favorable for foreign capital, then they would definitely have not allowed this, because every company wants to have as much stake as possible in asset management industry in China, because that industry is bound for very strong growth and has been seeing very strong growth. So the fact that they allowed Goldman Sachs to do this is a big sign that they are still very supportive of foreign capital.
Okay, thank you, Eu-Roy. So that concludes our talk show for today, Bapak Ibu. So I would like to say thank you to Eu-Roy and Kong Qian for joining me today. Sebelum saya tutup, saya mau summary dikit, Bapak Ibu. Jadi pada dasarnya kita melihat market China itu masih sangat positif. Memang ada sedikit hiccup seperti regulatory ini, tapi tujuannya ternyata positif, Bapak Ibu. Ya, karena pemerintahnya juga care terhadap para investornya, seperti sudah diceritakan tadi anti-monopoli, ya. Tadi education juga sama, mereka mau melimitin anak-anak katanya biar nggak stres ya, apalagi karena COVID ini semuanya sekolah secara online. Dan bayangin di China itu kan gap antara the richest and the poorest itu tuh very wide, Bapak Ibu. Ya, jadi nggak semua tuh anak bisa dapat kesempatan yang sama. Apalagi mereka juga kalau di university juga ada, saya lupa tuh nama satu tes itu juga yang luar biasa susahnya, Bapak Ibu ya. Jadi kita akan melihat pertumbuhannya ini menjadi sangat healthy. Jadi sebagai salah satu tujuan para investor juga ke depannya. Di Indonesia market juga masih positif. Kita akan melihat ada juga beberapa perubahan, terutama dengan IPO di tech sektor ini, Bapak Ibu. Kita juga melihat COVID ini menjadi salah satu tantangan, tapi tentunya ke depannya juga kita melihat ini sangat positif. Ya, oke, mungkin sekian sore ini acara dari kita. Thank you, Eu-Roy. Thank you, Kong Qian. Once again, terima kasih Bapak Ibu sudah bergabung pada acara hari ini, pada sore hari ini. Jika ada pertanyaan, jangan sungkan bisa lanjutkan ke teman-teman relationship manager kami di Eastspring Investment Indonesia. Oke, thank you very much. Stay safe and stay healthy. Terima kasih semuanya.
Thank you.
Thank you.